Judy Lev. It's November 20th, 2008, and I'm interviewing Temima Bar Ilan in Rehovot. The interview will be conducted in English. Okay, I'm just going to ask you a few questions.
Go ahead.
Your name and spelling.
Well, in Hebrew, it's Temima Bar Ilan. Taf Mem Yud Mem Hey Bar Ilan. But originally my name was Florence, and when I came here, I decided I wanted a Hebrew name.
Okay, and when your name was Florence, what date were you born? Your date of birth?
November 17th, 1915.
Okay, and how old are you now? You're
93 this
93.
week.
And your country of birth, your city, country?
United States.
What city were you born?
Brooklyn, New York.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you just to tell me a little bit about your background and where you were born and up until you came to Israel and why you came to Israel.
Yes. I was born in Brooklyn. I went to public schools. When I was 12, they opened a Hebrew school in the neighborhood. It was in Crown Heights. And in those days, Crown Heights was not what it is today. There were a number of Jews, but it wasn't anything like today. And at first, I objected. I said, I'm 12 years old. I never needed Hebrew. I can't see any reason for studying Hebrew. But my mother insisted. She said that I had to learn how to read and write Hebrew, and then I could stop. Well, I didn't stop. I was very fortunate. I had a marvelous teacher.
What was the name of your school?
The Crown Heights Talmud Torah. And there was a class, well, at the beginning there were also boys in the class, but later there wasn't. She was a marvelous teacher. Years later, when I learned a lot about teaching English, I realized how much she had done and how very progressive her methods were. It interested me, and I put in a lot of effort to learn. And then I went on to more years of studying Hebrew.
It was the Hebrew that was interesting to you?
Yes. At one point, my mother said we couldn't go on with piano lessons and Hebrew. So my sister chose piano and I chose Hebrew. But when I look back on this, I realized in the days of the Depression, my mother never said a word about money. She just said, you're too busy.
But you think maybe it was a money problem?
Well, there wasn't my father worked for the Parole Commission of New York City. So that in the Depression, he got his salary regularly. Of course, it wasn't a big salary, but it was regular. You could count on it.
When you learned Hebrew, it was modern Hebrew or it was...
Modern Hebrew. Modern Hebrew.
And how long did you stay in that school?
I stayed years and years because I graduated whatever program they had, and afterwards I studied Hebrew. I went... there was a time when I went to the Lower East Side, and afterwards they had classes in Borough Park. So when I was at college, I went out to Borough Park for lessons in Hebrew.
Were you involved in any youth groups?
Yes. This teacher helped us organize a young Judea group. And I was president and made a lot of decisions. For example, I said we'd start every meeting by reading one of the Psalms. And we had a newspaper, And in 1936, 7, no, before that, there was a nationwide essay contest, something like, what does Palestine mean to me? And I won it. And the prize was to attend the convention of Young Judea in some place in New Jersey. And
who sponsored the concert? Who sponsored the contest?
Young Judea. They had a magazine.
And what did you know about Israel?
Well, considering I really didn't know very much. I don't even remember what I thought about it. But it was, how should I say, it was more than a hobby.
Where did you get your information from? Whatever you knew about Israel, where did you get your information?
I read the newspaper. And I got the magazine of Young Judea. And at one time, there was a letter from a girl in India who described her brother's marriage, which was a combination of Jewish and Indian culture. And we corresponded for a while, and afterwards it got to be boring. She kept telling me what she was doing in school, and I wasn't very much interested.
And after you finished that school, the Crown Heights School, what did you do after that?
Well, I went to high school and then college.
And what was the atmosphere like in America during those years? It was the 1930s for Jews.
I don't really know. I mean, first of all, we lived in a family and went to school and went to Hebrew school and had piano lessons.
And whatever you knew about Israel, that was what you read in the newspapers, or did you meet people from Israel?
No, I didn't know it.
So how did you what propelled you to come to Israel?
Well, first of all, I was, how shall I say, very much interested in the Jewish people and Palestine. And then when I was in college, I worked in a summer camp, Sedgman, which was a Zionist camp. And first I was a camper, and then I was counselor. And when I was counselor, one year, I met my husband. He was from Jerusalem, and he wanted to study chemical engineering. But at that time, the Technion didn't have that program. So we came to the States. He had a married sister in the States, and he worked in the summer camp. What do students do in the summertime? They look for work. So I met him there, and it was, how should I say, within 2 weeks we knew that was it. And then he finished his degree, and I finished mine, and I worked for a year in YMHA in North Manhattan. They paid me $1 an hour, but subway ride was 5 cents. So I had money for my trip.
Was he the first person you ever met from Israel?
No, there were people from Israel in the camp. Or people who had been to Israel and come back. As a matter of fact, my Hebrew teacher went to Palestine. For 2 years, she was Magnus's secretary. You know, Magnus was then the head of the... Judah Magnus, that's right. He was head of the university.
And at what point did you said you moved to Israel because you met him, and did you?
We decided to get married, and for me it was a combination of love and the idea. Because before that, when in the camp, people would speculate, where would we be 10 years from now? Everybody agreed that I would be in Palestine.
Were there other people that went to Palestine, or you were among was there a group, or?
Well, on the boat,
Oh, you met?
I met people. I met two young men who had fellowships for a year at the Hebrew University. One of them was Moshe Davis. Do you know his wife? She lives in Jerusalem. Well, she's also an old, she wasn't here during the war, but she came for a year when he was here, and came back after the war.
And you went to Israel, and you joined your husband, fiance there?
Yes. I came to Rehovot 71 years ago. He was doing a doctorate in what is today the Weizmann Institute. It was a part of the Hebrew University, and he was one of the first to have a doctorate in chemistry from the Hebrew University. So we came to Rehovot. Rehovot, there was 5,000 people. And I'd like to tell the story of our coming. At first I stayed with his parents, and he went back to Rehovot to a room. And I stayed in Jerusalem, and I taught English.
You weren't married then?
We were married.
You got gotten married in Israel?
In Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, okay.
Right. And finally we decided that my job in Israel was in Jerusalem, was temporary. I was substituting for my sister-in-law, who decided that since I came, she could permit herself to go off to England to raise funds. At that time, it was the Bet Medrash Lemorot Mizrahi, and they had a house with some apartments, and they were new Olim.
What year are we talking about?
37.
Okay, the new Olim.
And she went off to London to relatives. Incidentally, she stayed in the home of the parents of Ephraim Levy, who is very busy advising our government, you know. So she was coming back, and I was losing my job. So I went to Rehovot. We took an apartment in an old Arab house. At that time, the streets didn't have numbers, so I would get mail at Rehovot, Zevin's house, on Noda Street. And the first day we came, we started unpacking, and at one point I said, let's stop, get washed, and eat something, then we'll go back and finish. I go into the bathroom, and I say, where's the second faucet? There was only one faucet, and my husband, it never occurred to me to look. There was only cold water. So that's one of the stories I like to tell.
And what did you do when you came to Rehovot?
Well, this was in about Hanukkah time. I don't remember what I did at the beginning, but I quickly got a job teaching English. So for the next school year, I was teaching English.
Okay, I'm going to go back a little bit, and I'm going to ask you, when you stayed in your in-laws' house, that was with Rabbi Bar Ilan.
Right.
What was it like living there in the 1930s?
Oh, they had a very modern apartment. There was heating, there was hot water, there was... it was a very busy house. People were coming and going all the time.
What kind of people?
Political people came to see my father-in-law. No, none of that. At that time, he started the Talmud Encyclopedia. And scholars, rabbis, came several times a week to consult. They would sit in the living room and...
When you said there were political people, were you aware of any of the political going-ons?
Just that the people came from the Mizrahi.
And do you know what they were discussing, or?
No. No.
He didn't conclude you, or you weren't?
No, I was out.
What was the atmosphere then, like in when you were in Jerusalem pre-war?
Well, there were British soldiers around, and in 1937, the day we got married, there was altar. You weren't allowed to leave the house after a certain hour.
Curfew.
Curfew, that's right, curfew. And in the morning, my husband went to the commissioner and pointed out that part of the wedding celebrations is Sheva Brachot, and that we need gentlemen to come in the evening to provide a minyan. Well, the commissioner agreed. However, he refused to allow my mother-in-law to have extra help. She had asked extra people to come and serve dinner in the house. And he was ready to let the men come, but he didn't. All the work fell on my mother-in-law and particularly on the maid. We had a woman living in the house and 24 hours a day. I mean, actually, she didn't work 24 hours a day, but she slept in the building, and she did all the work. The cooking and maybe the cooking was, they had help, I don't know.
Did you ever have what was your relationship with the British soldiers? Did you ever have a confrontation with them?
No, but occasionally it was convenient to speak English.
Why is that?
Well, if you were stopped in the street.
Why would they stop you?
Well, not then, but later, my husband and I were going to the movies, and they told us to turn around and go back. That we shouldn't go to but then there's another story. My husband went to buy some cake and took our little boy with him. The little boy lost patience while his father was getting changed. He walked out of this bakery and complained that he was lost. Well, we were worried then because there were British patrols in Jerusalem at the time. But finally, somebody found my son and brought him home. But not the British. But this was, wait a minute, we must have been on a visit. We moved to Jerusalem when my mother-in-law died, and I ran the house.
So you lived in Rehovot?
We lived in Rehovot, but then we didn't stay long in the house with only one faucet. We found an apartment, which I visited a couple of years ago, which is so old and shabby, but then it was brand new and it had hot water all the time. And After that, we had to leave that house because the British requisitioned it for their police. We had to leave the apartment.
Did they compensate you?
No. No. But we found a place.
Did they do that very often?
I don't know. They took the whole building.
Oh, they did. And then how long did you stay in Rehovot?
We stayed till 44 when my mother-in-law died. I taught English first in the elementary school and for a while in a school in Sha'arayim where there were only Yemenite children. And then the next year I taught in the high school.
And when you moved back to Jerusalem, what year was that again?
44.
44. And you moved in, where did you go? You went to the...
With my in-laws, yes.
And what did you do there then?
Well, there was a house with people coming all the time, meetings. I was a little boy, then I had a daughter.
And you spent, what did you, I'm just going to go back a little bit. When you first came to Israel, what did you think was going to be waiting for you here? Did you have any expectations?
I knew my husband was waiting for me, that's all I knew. It was a great adventure. Everything was new. I had never seen a primus before. And certainly not the ptilia.
What is that exactly?
The ptilia is a little kerosene contraption, and you cooked on it. However, I was one of the first. I had a gas stove and a refrigerator from the beginning.
And most people didn't have?
No. Most people didn't even think about it. But I had come from a house with a refrigerator. So
you had to have a refrigerator. What was it like being part of your father-in-law was a famous, head of the Mizrahi. What was it like being part of that family?
Well, as I said, there were scholars who came and talked about the encyclopedia. And if he had other business, I didn't always know. Theoretically, at that time, my father-in-law was not getting a salary from the Mizrahi, but he was working in insurance. And he would travel to Tel Aviv several times a week, and then he'd come home for lunch, and a lot of people knew he'd be home for lunch, so they came. Particularly the rabbi now, the Ria, who later founded the Bnei Akiva yeshivot. He would come at lunchtime, and it would annoy my mother-in-law because she wanted her husband to have lunch in peace.
About those war years, or pre-war years,
Yeah.
when you were in Yerushalayim, the late night, correct?
Well, first of all, don't forget the World War, when there was a time we didn't know what would happen. There were talks about retreating to the area around Zichron Yaakov, that the British would that the Germans would be coming through Egypt to us.
Where did you hear this information from?
Well, we had a radio. Not everybody had a radio. And we get newspapers. And my husband was in the army from January 43 till 46.
Which army?
The British Army.
The British.
And first he was trained here in Palestine, and then he went to Egypt, and he would come home from Egypt driving a big truck, and that was when she was born. But
what did he do? What was his job in the army?
In a chemical lab. For example, in Egypt, he was in Ismail. He had how much of a time, and as far as I heard from him, one of the things that he did was to check whether the percentage of sugar in the jam that the army was buying was up to standard. But another story he told me, that just as the British soldiers got cigarettes from the army, there were Indians. And at least once, he sat and measured out drugs that the Indian soldiers were getting. I suppose it was hashish, under the auspices of the British Empire. And as a officer in the British Army, I had privileges of buying in what was called a naffy, like the shekel. And there were things that nobody could get, and I could buy in Jerusalem.
Like what?
Like canned fruit, and come to think about it, what else did I carry? Because I carried it home. And when I was in Rehovot, I would take the bus to Rishon and walk the back roads to Sarafand. Now, in those days, we weren't afraid of anything. Now, what? I don't know what's going on.
Okay, let's continue.
While he was in the army, you were in Jerusalem, or?
I was in. Wait a minute.
Because you said you were in Rehovot.
I'm trying to think.
Let me just.
Hello. Oh.
Yeah, Angelique.
We'll go back to when your husband was in the army.
Yes.
And you were in?
Well, at the beginning, he was in the army
1943.
from January 43. And my mother-in-law died in 44. So the beginning, I was in Rehovot, and he was in who knows where. And later on, I was in Jerusalem.
He was drafted into the army?
No.
He enlisted?
No, they all volunteered, except that a great many volunteered for the Jewish Brigade. But he, as a chemist, went into the Royal Engineers.
Well, what was his feeling about the British that he...
No, he said he wanted to fight Hitler. He just waited till the baby was born.
But he had a lot of doings with the British.
Well, he had no problems with them.
Uh-huh.
Except he told me that later on he told me that after the war, he wasn't demobilized till after the fighting. That there was a British officer who wouldn't believe that 6 million had been killed. But otherwise, I didn't hear anything about it.
What did you know about what was going on in Europe with the Jews?
We heard rumors, and it was very hard to believe Especially, I remembered that there were talks of atrocities in the First World War. And afterwards, it turned out that a lot of it was propaganda, that the Germans in Belgium were not as cruel as was thought or was said at the beginning. So, the atrocities in Europe, well, maybe it's the same story.
So it was hard to believe.
It was hard to believe, and there was a day of a general strike in sympathy and protest, I don't remember.
Did you know of any people, any Jews that had come over from Europe?
At that time, no.
No, you didn't.
At that time, no. Afterwards, after the war, I remember a time when there was an illegal ship that arrived here someplace in the area, and we were asked to take people into our homes to disguise them as...
Did you?
No, they didn't ask us.
Mm-hmm.
They asked us once, theoretically, if there was a baby, if there were children, would we take one in? But it never materialized.
What was it like for you when your husband wasn't around and you were in Jerusalem?
It was, in Jerusalem it was easy. We had a maid, and actually when I had 2 children, I had another woman for a half a day. And don't forget, in those days, we had cloth diapers. And so a baby wasn't something very easy. We made our own. We didn't have Gerber. We didn't have any of these ready-made stuff. So dealing with a baby was a lot of work.
Were you aware of the Arab propaganda, what was going on, the conflict between the Arabs and the Jews at that time?
No.
You weren't aware of that?
No, I mean, we knew that there had been, well, look, the day I was married was part of the Morat, what it called, the Arab Revolt. Yes? One day we went, before the wedding, my husband took me to the old city, and he said to me, "See how quiet it is, many stores are closed." We got home, it turned out that was the day that the Mufti had escaped, and the British were all looking for him. But
there were some terrorist attacks in Jerusalem during those years, weren't there?
not
The Jewish
then,
agency?
but some relatives from Tiberias visited us, and afterwards we heard sometimes.
About your relatives
Yes,
in Tiberias?
some elderly per couple, and sometimes afterwards we heard that there was an uprising in Tiberias and they were murdered.
Your relatives were murdered?
Yeah, I didn't know them. I don't exactly know how they were related. I remember them visiting us. And that happens. Wait a minute. When we moved to our second apartment in Rehovot, the Haganah was called out because in Ibn Gabir, no, Bekfar Gabirol, a family was murdered, and my husband went out with a gun, and the first night I didn't sleep. The second night I fell asleep. The third, in the middle. The third night I went to sleep regularly.
So he was
in the Haganah.
Mm-hmm. He was in the Haganah and the British Army?
No, it was after.
After.
Wait a minute. He was in the Haganah. This was in 1938. And he was in the British Army. He was there in the British in the Haganah. And as a matter of fact, when my first son was born, he was head of Magen David Adom in Rehovot, and we got an ambulance for that. He was head of Magen David Adom as a branch of the Haganah.
Mm-hmm. I see.
And that was in 42.
Okay, I want to go back to Jerusalem a little bit. The war years. You said that you weren't aware of any Arab terrorist attacks or uprisings.
But what years are we talking about?
We're talking about the war years, but before the British left. I'm talking about before the British left, when the Arabs started.
I can only tell you about the 29th of November.
Okay.
At that time, both my husband and my father-in-law were abroad. They were both actually on the way home by boat. But I was in the house with 2 small children. And she was sick. And finally she fell asleep at night, and I went to sleep. And I'm awakened in the middle of the night by shouts outside. I look out of the window and see people in the street. And then I realized it was the 29th of November, that it was the day that the United Nations made the decision. Well, the next morning, I walked to town to get a doctor, to consult a doctor, and people were dancing in the streets around the Jewish Agency building. And then I heard that a taxi had been attacked. That is, the people. The Arabs had attacked a taxi near Netanya. And then we realized that it wasn't so simple.
That what wasn't so simple?
A state. I mean, they were dancing in the street, but we quickly learned that it wasn't going to be all dancing and singing.
So how did life change for you?
Well, it changed in many ways. First of all, I don't remember the order in which things happened. A survey was made. I was in Mishmar Ha'am. Mishmar Ha'am, it was called. And I was assigned various duties.
What was Lishma?
It was sort of a local organization of Jewish people, not the army. I don't remember exactly, but one of my great-granddaughters had to write something about Shorashim for school. So she wrote about me, and I gave her, I found the, how should I say, a thank you note that I had served. What did I do?
This is in 1947, 48?
Yeah. Because I had help in the house, I was free to go out, and I would stand in the backyard entrance of a school to see that no stranger approached. What I would do if he did, I have no idea, because I had no weapons. By the way, I learned in the Haganah here in Rehovot how to take a gun apart and put it together. But of course I never had to do it. And then another thing, when there was the explosion on Ben Yehuda Street, I was asked to sit in the office near the Zion Theater to answer the telephone. And it was a terrible sight to see, because apparently a lot of businesses had been affected by the blast. And I remember, I don't know why, but I remember lots of fires. And so I would sit in the office and take messages, which at that time wasn't easy because my Hebrew was good, but I wasn't used. One day they said something about chamushim, and at that time I just didn't know the word.
Well, what kind of people called you? What did they call you for?
There were apparently other branches in the city passing messages from one to the other. I mean, I didn't respond. I just said, pass it on to somebody.
Do you remember any of the messages?
No.
But that was the day of the blast?
The day after the blast. The day after the blast.
Did you know any people that were?
My did I know? No. But my dentist's son was killed in one of the attacks on the road.
Were there other terrorist attacks like the Jewish Agency attack? Do you remember that?
The Jewish Agency I remember very well.
When was that?
It was in March 48. That was when somebody from the American Embassy brought a truck and exploded in the courtyard of the agency. And my husband's cousin worked in Keren HaYesod. So, like everybody else, he went out to see if he could find her. He came back and said he couldn't find her. My father said, go back again. And this time he found her. Apparently the blast had scalped her. All her hair was gone. So he didn't recognize her at the beginning. And then her name was Michal, and my son Micha is named for her. And then all day we waited to get news. And her daughters stayed with us, and I had to tell them that it was final, that she was gone. Mm-hmm. That's Atida and Mira.
And what else happened around after that? What were the things that you remember with the siege of Jerusalem?
We had friends, and he was with a group, I don't know how official it was, who went into a minefield by mistake, and then he went in to rescue someone, but he was killed too. And so I went to the funeral. I went to my friend, who was sitting Shiva with three little girls, and in the courtyard behind Bikur Cholim, the coffins were put there, and for the first time in my life, my friend opened the casket. I don't know whether it was open or she opened it, but I saw him fully dressed, and she kissed him. And then at the other end of the courtyard, this was a friend from England. At the other end of the courtyard were people from Eidot Mizrach who were mourning by screaming and shouting, and here it was very quiet. And I remember in the taxi going to the funeral where she said, "Look, everything around me is normal." But was normal, but her husband had been killed.
Mm-hmm.
And he was fully dressed, the sweater, and so on.
In what other ways, like, did you ever think that it wasn't going to end?
We had neighbors who had a paralyzed child from polio. And she said to me one day, well, more than once, she said, "Let's bring the children to the Red Cross." And I said, "No, if we leave the house, we'll never come back." And so, I mean, I understood her. With a paralyzed child, to run would be impossible. But I said, "No, I'm staying."
Why did she want to bring her child to the Red Cross?
During the fighting in Jerusalem.
What was her reason?
Well, she hoped that he would be safe.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't run with a child like that.
So, did you remember that there was was there a lot of fighting where you were? What neighborhood were you in?
We lived in Rehovot,
Okay.
on Official Street. And in the morning, I would hear people going out to man the outskirts of the city. Or maybe, and yes, when they took Katamon, I saw them carrying all kinds of furniture.
Who did you see carrying?
I'm sorry?
Who carried the furniture?
Jewish men looting what was abandoned. But I can also tell you they were singing Schubert's Marche Militaire. They would sing as they passed by in the morning. And I can only say that I had blankets out to air and found them later with holes in them, but I didn't find bullets. I didn't hear or see anything. I only found the holes in the blankets later. And then, because we were afraid that there would be shelling from a distance, we had a bedroom with windows on 3 sides. So we took the mattresses and put them in the children's room because we thought that side was safer. And afterwards, the children said, "Why aren't we staying in the room with them?"
Well, how was it to raise your children at that time?
Well, if you want to hear about water, the tablecloth for Pesach was washed after Tisha B'Av. We got a ration of water, and I had 2 pails. And if somebody was with me, they would allow me to fill a kettle. But I couldn't carry more than 2 pails. And once, Shai Agdon came out and helped me carry the water. And the water was a problem.
He was your neighbor?
Yes, because his home was in Talpiot. And it was most unsafe. They thought Rehovot would be better. And the people downstairs rented out rooms. So we rented a room downstairs. And when he was there, I remember they were making a survey. How many people were living in each building? That if...
Who made the survey?
Maybe Mishmacha.
Okay.
That if the building was destroyed, how many people should we look for? And I wrote down Agnon's name. With water was a story. Of course, we had a drink, but we were very careful about washing. I washed
Where did you get your water
from these trucks. When the truck passed by, you went out with your pails.
How many times a day did it come by?
Oh, how many times a week?
Oh, a week. So how did you do your washing, you were saying?
Well, first of all, we would wash the children, and then we would use some of the water for ourselves, and then we would wash the children's clothes. And then we would pour this water down the toilet, and afterwards, when the water was restored, it was not easy to scrub the toilet. And I had a gas stove, but there was no gas. I had a Prius, but there was no kerosene. Our maid had been brought up in the old city, and she was very ingenious. She took bricks and made a circle. In the middle, we took all the pieces of wood from the sukkah, and she would light a fire.
Inside the apartment?
No, on the balcony.
On the balcony.
On the balcony. And I don't remember being hungry, but I remember thinking, will we ever sit down to a proper meal with more than one course? And, well, that went on. From time to time, we would hear there's a store that has something special. Chocolate, chocolate cream to spread on the bread or whatever you had. And I remember walking to town and then bringing some of it to my friend sitting Shiva with the shells going overhead. In the grocery store, there was plenty of liquor, plenty of tea, and plenty of starch. Nobody was washing clothes. Mm. And I had something very special. My sister had sent me before, sometimes an American rack, so that I could put the children's pants in it. We couldn't iron. There was electricity only a few hours a day. We didn't know when it would come on and what to do first. And also, something I thought about. Oh, they discovered a lot of candles in the monastery of the Cross in the valley outside of Rehovot. And there was a question whether we could use those candles for Shabbat. I don't remember, it never happens, but I don't remember using them actually. But the sukkah went, and then in June, there was a shvita, no, it was some kind of a truce. And my husband went, all this time, he was in the Haganah, in the army, and he walked from our house in Rehovot about an hour to the other end of town, to Schneller. Schneller was originally an orphanage, and the army took it over, and he was in what was called Chemed, Chel Mada. And the madar that he did, they were simply filling shells. And my maid says, why do you let him go so far, walk so far? I said, you yourself were walking. There were no buses. There was something else I wanted to say about the army. And maybe it'll come back to me.
Were you afraid walking around all that time when there were shells?
I think I'm too stupid about things like that. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid. But, oh, there's a story I'd like to tell. I know, remember. And they said at that time that the army was very festive. Yomtevdik in Yiddish. Yomtevdik in Yiddish. Yes. In what way? Well, they dress like Purim, they sleep like Sukkot, and they eat like Yom Kippur. So you see that people made jokes even then. When it all began, a relative of my husband came rushing to the house. He says they're burning the stores on Mermela Road. That was the beginning.
The Arabs.
The Arabs. I remember he was all excited. We didn't know what would happen next, of course.
What were your thoughts then? Did you?
I don't know. I wasn't afraid, which is utterly illogical. But, I can tell you this. I remember walking home taking my older boy home from kindergarten. And he said to me, I remember this very well. I remember exactly what I was looking at. He says, Ima, in the old days of the Maccabim, we were few and they were many, and then we conquered. And will it be this way again? And I said, yes.
You were truly optimistic?
Right.
Were you aware of people that were very pessimistic, or?
Well, you wouldn't say my neighbor wants to send his children to the Red Cross. Look, I'm the kind of person who always sees half glass full. Mm-hmm. So.
Did people have an idea how long the war would go on? Did they think of that they wouldn't win the war?
Look, I was isolated in the sense that in the family they didn't talk about it. The army certainly didn't talk about it. Of course we should have. I mean, looking back, we were living in a fool's paradise. But I didn't have many people around. I mean, logically, here, this cousin had been killed. And we heard about somebody else who was killed waiting for the water someplace. And I happened to be in a hospital, and I saw a girl walking around with half an arm. But I don't know, maybe we were so young and foolish that...
You were busy with your kids. Was it hard to raise the children in that kind of atmosphere?
Well, it was very inconvenient without water and without a variety of food.
What did you do for drinking water?
Oh, that we always had.
How did you have that?
Well, the water came in these pails, and they were very nice pails. They were enameled. And we never lacked for drinking water. There was a ration of bread, but we never finished it. We never ate enough bread. Never had to eat enough bread. And my father-in-law was sick with heart disease. And we had I'm trying to remember, we must have had some milk. Must have had some milk.
Do you remember your father-in-law, what his reaction was to the whole?
Well, he was very optimistic, although at one point, I remember Ben Tzvi coming to the house. Ben Tzvi and my father-in-law were, so to speak, in charge of Jerusalem. That if, heaven forbid, we had to surrender, they would be the two people who would go to the Arabs.
Who appointed them to do that?
I suppose the agency.
The Jewish agency?
Or the Caroline Assault, I don't know.
I want to go back, what you said, that in case that the war didn't go as planned, that your father-in-law and Ben Tzvi would
be the official representatives of the Jews in Jerusalem.
Who appointed them?
I have no idea.
Did they ever talk about it in front of you?
No, I just remember once Ben Tzvi coming to the house. But I don't remember.
Mm-hmm. And did you know people who left Jerusalem during this time?
No.
You weren't aware?
I didn't know very many people, except family. My husband wasn't working in Jerusalem, and I had a few friends, and that's all.
He was working where?
He was in the army.
Oh, he was
in Saab.
Where? Do you know where he was?
Yes, he was in Schneller.
Oh, he was in Jerusalem.
Yeah, and then, of course, he was also present when they were trying to rescue people from the old city. They were shooting from some place in our part of the city towards the old city.
The Arabs were shooting from...
No. The Haganah was shooting. And they weren't successful. Oh, and I can also tell you, the day when the Jews of the old city surrendered, they went to Katamon. And as a member of Mishmar Ha'am, there I was, trying to find out how many families were in each building. And the survey was made, each time they had different numbers. The bread was brought twice a day, people came out of the houses, and then there were stories about people from the old city who were living in the buildings abandoned by the Arabs in Katamon, that they didn't know how to flush the toilet. It was a story. But every time we counted people, the number was different.
Why was that?
Maybe people moved, who knows? But it's an example of how difficult it is to get statistics.
Do you remember when the Jews came from the old city? Did you see that?
No, I didn't see it. We were called to come to Katamon and tell people that at a certain time the bread would be distributed.
And what did you know about the surrender of the old city, or the evacuation of it?
From the newspaper, I think. Maybe the radio. I don't know. But of course, before that, we heard that attempts had been made to introduce members of the Haganah to help them.
To help them get.
To help them resist, to help them hold out.
They weren't able to do that.
No.
When did the siege end for you, and what did that mean for you when it
In
ended?
June, my husband drove a car to Tel Aviv, and he came back with tomatoes and the first detergent I had ever seen.
Until then, he wasn't able to leave Jerusalem.
No.
You had a car? You had your own car?
An army car.
Uh-huh. So he was able to go to Tel Aviv?
He apparently had to go to Tel Aviv and came back. I don't remember other things. I remember the tomatoes.
How long had it been since you'd seen tomatoes?
Well, we had Pesach, we had a Seder. So
Where'd you get the food for the Seder?
there were convoys that got through. But as I say, we didn't know. I thought to myself, "Achata v'savata v'berachta." So, לא יחסר לנו, כן? But we managed. We managed.
Did people complain, or were they worried
In the family, we didn't complain. We
among your neighbors?
didn't have much to do with neighbors. I had a neighbor where we discussed the problem. If you're running out of supplies, should you save it for tomorrow or should you eat it today?
So what's the answer?
Well, I don't know what they did. We ate it today, expecting tomorrow to be better. That was the neighbors.
What were, in this bad time, this hard time, what were the good things that happened?
I don't know. We coped. We managed. We managed. I remember one night, my son said he couldn't fall asleep because of the shooting. So he was afraid. So I said, you know, Shimon, he was a boy, a teenager, who stayed at the house during the day to help my father-in-law, to answer the door, answer the telephone. I said, look, Shimon is a soldier, and he's also afraid, but he does what he has to do, and he'll have to sleep now. No, he says, Shimon has a gun. I don't. But you see, that's my attitude. I don't get panicky.
Did the kids ever panic? They were little?
No. Children in general pick up what they see around them.
How did they get to school? You took them, or they went
There
to
was
school?
a kindergarten.
Uh-huh. And what did they have? Any plans in the kindergarten if there were going to be?
I don't remember.
And when did things start getting better?
As I say, after the truce, there was a fighting again and another truce, and then it was quiet.
And when the war ended gradually for you, or?
Yeah.
And when did you realize that the war was over?
Don't remember. I don't remember any specific occasion. Temima.
Between the different part, the Irgun and Agana?
I don't. Yes, we were. And we were frightened by the thought that the Levy or Asa would go too far. And then there would be reactions.
Reactions from who?
From the British.
Mm-hmm.
From the British. Years later, I found out that my father-in-law knew all the time where Begin was hiding. But at the time, never occurred to us.
Was he a friend of Begin? Or?
No. Apparently, it was political. That is, the Mizrahi people knew.
Were they?
I have no idea. They were conducting business, sending people. As my father-in-law stayed in the house, he didn't leave, and so they were.
The whole war, he stayed in the house.
No, except when he flew
Oh.
on a plane to Tel Aviv.
Oh, he flew to.
He flew once from what was later Givat Shul to Tel Aviv. I went to take my young son to see the plane.
Why did he have to fly?
Apparently, they thought it was safer than going by road.
Where in Givat Shul there was an airport?
No, it was just an empty field before it was built up.
Mm-hmm. And what did he do in Tel Aviv when he went?
No idea. Must have been a meeting of the agency of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember when they blew up the King David Hotel? Were you?
Oh, yes.
What do you
Yes.
remember about that?
I remember it because I was in the bedroom and she was standing there, and when the boom came, she jumped. So I know exactly when it happened. And then little by little the news came out, and then I found out sometime later that before that, some years before that, I had been in a hospital, and there was a Greek Orthodox girl, and she was one of those killed in the blast.
What was your reaction? Did you have a reaction to that?
No. Just that I remember her jumping.
Did people think it was a good thing or a bad thing?
No. I didn't hear judgment about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to go back to when things settled down. When did you realize that things were settling down and the war was over?
But 48, let's see. I don't remember.
Well, did life go back to normal for you, or what was normal for you?
Well, my husband was in the Haganah, and then in September 40, I'm not talking about the end of the World War. No, I don't remember. I don't remember.
Did you have communication with your family in America this time?
Mail.
There was mail during the siege?
Well, the fact is, I have these letters.
Oh.
And I remember going to the post office, and they had the unusual stamps, but it never occurred to us to save them.
Oh. What did your family write to you at this time?
How are we and how are we managing? Things like that. Family news.
Mm-hmm.
And the mail didn't come regularly. We got it.
How often did it come?
Don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
Don't remember.
What are you most proud of since you've been here, your role in the...
I don't think I did more than anybody else did.
And after the war, what was your life like?
Well, in 1950, we left. My father-in-law died in Pesach, on Pesach 49. And then my husband wanted to set up a factory in plastics. And that was the reason he had been to the States at the time of the United Nations decision. And in 1950, we left Jerusalem and moved to Rehovot, and it was quite a problem because there were no apartments. At that time, friends of ours heard that we were planning to leave Jerusalem, and our apartment was requisitioned for Judge Chesed of the Supreme Court. And we had to leave.
In Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem. And
who requisitioned it?
The government. They moved the Supreme Court to Jerusalem. And Avraham Biran was the district commissioner. And he had heard through friends of ours that we were leaving. And they had to leave their apartment in Tel Aviv. And we weren't ready with the apartments in Rehovot. So for about 2 weeks, they lived in part of our apartment. People made do. You know, you make the best of it. So we moved in 1950 to Jerusalem, to Rehovot. Part of the financial situation was that when you left an apartment, you got key money from the people moving in. Now, when we left Rehovot in 1944 to live in Jerusalem, it never occurred to us to ask for key money. When we had to leave the apartment in Jerusalem, we couldn't get key money because the government had taken it. So, and there were no apartments in Jerusalem, in Rehovot. But we came to an arrangement with some man who had plans to build another addition to his house, and we worked out an arrangement that he would build it for us. So then we lived in Rehovot for 6 years, and then moved to Holland. In the meantime, then when we moved to Rehovot, my husband didn't like the arrangement with the investors in the plastics, so we went to the States again. And there our youngest was born. We came back in the spring of '52, and at the airport they ran after me and said, "You've got a new Ole." So we had to fill out papers for him.
Oh, your son. Was that the first time you had been back since you got married?
No, we went back in '46. The American government had special arrangements for families who had not been able to go back because of the war. And we got passage on a ship called the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps had been renovated for a troop ship. And there we were with two small kids. Most people were in a dormitory, the men and the women, but because we were a family, they gave us a carpet, and they had bunks. It's not nice to make the comparison. I've seen pictures of concentration camps, but that's what we had. So the kids slept on the bottom, and we slept on the top. And then we were afraid all the time. They spoke only Hebrew, so we couldn't leave them alone. And one night, my husband would take the boy into the shower and stay with him for the evening. And the next night, I would take her into the shower with me, and we would stay in the cabin for the rest of the evening. There was no entertainment of any kind. And the arrangements were made for having something kosher was difficult. They had certain cans of things. And we had canned chicken soup and spaghetti. And my sister had made arrangements to send Gerber. She wouldn't touch it. We had a whole box full of it. She wouldn't touch it.
When you went back to America after the war, how did people...
They were sure. The family thought I was staying.
In America?
In America. And I said no. That I didn't want to bring my children up in America. And so we came back.
Do you have any regrets? Anything that you...
No. I don't know whether it's part of the story, but my sister has the same 4 children that I have. When I had a son, she had a son. When I had a daughter, etc. Today, she's also in a retiring home. She has 1 granddaughter that's Jewish and 1 grandson that isn't Jewish. So if the judge, 70 years later, or 60 years later, I have the better bargain.
Well, I just want to go back to one thing. When the war was over, what was your father-in-law's reaction?
Which war?
The War of Independence in 1948.
He said that the members of the early Congresses never dreamed that they, in their lifetime, would see a Jewish state.
Did you ever dream that?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't that important.
What was important?
That I was living in a Jewish state.
you optimistic for the future?
Am I optimistic? Yes, I'm optimistic by character.
Oh.
So,
Wrong question for optimistic person.
right.
Do you have anything that you would like to add and say about your experiences?
Look, one of my sons, no, 3 of my sons have been wounded in action. The first one was with paratroopers that took the old city in '67. And he was fortunately put out of action very early. A grenade exploded behind him, and he still has shrapnel in his buttocks and his legs. And that took him out of action before they entered the old city, which was fortunate. My second son was in a command car that hit a mine. The fellow who was sitting in his place asked him to change places, and the other one was badly injured. My son had a piece of this tire hit his arm, and he's got I think 19% disability. You need 20 to get a car. So he doesn't get a car. He has problems with one of his legs from his activities. My youngest lost a leg in Lebanon. So once he said that his mother, because of his mother's Zionism, that's the price he paid. So maybe from their point of view,
So your Zionism was a positive thing for you.
yes. Yes. So that, they say what you go through. And I say you don't go through anything. It stays. So, look, at the best of it, I mean, he, in Lebanon, from what I heard, he had presence of mind when they jumped out of a car to take his gun with him, and they later used the strap as a tourniquet. Later, I met the medic who took care of him. He said when he put him on the plane, he didn't know whether he'd see him again. So that's... However, at the same time, when I visited him in Tel HaShomer, there was a man there who had simply jumped out of a car, out of a truck, and landed unsuccessfully. He was a man who had just opened the carpenter shop before the war. And here he was, 2 arms, 2 legs. He couldn't lift anything. He couldn't sit comfortably in a chair. His livelihood was gone. So, without a leg, it's not easy. From time to time, the prosthesis has to be changed. There are many operations to make the stump fit better in the prosthesis. He's got a job. He's got a career. Look, we don't choose these things, right? We make the best of what we got.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.